Okay, no
Madam
problem.
is not in this forum. Madam knows forum very well. She is a known personality to this forum because already Madam gave the lead presentations here. And another thing is, so we owe tremendously to a lot to Dr. Sangeetha Madam, because she was the one instrumental in bringing our Dinesh Kumar ji from Haryana to this forum. And through her, through her, we got our let's say Dinesh ji's contact. From Dinesh ji's contact, we got Saroj Bala Madam of Delhi Technological University, and through her, so many contacts. You see the thing. So big salute to you, ma'am. And again, you. We feel so very proud of you, and big salute to you once again for gracing this occasion and giving us all the leads. And so Delta Forum is supposed to give you a standing ovation. That's what I should say. And hearty welcome to you, ma'am.
Thank
once
you,
again.
thank you, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I extend a hearty welcome to you once again. Thank you so much for gracing this occasion. Yes, ma'am.
Sangeetha, welcome, and then good evening, and sorry for having encroached your time. I'm sorry.
No problem, sir. No problem. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Saravanan sir. Thank you so much for your well and good introduction to me. And it's my duty to introduce the speakers for the welfare of the learners. So I feel very proud to introduce some of the North speakers to you, and I am very happy to that. And once again, I thanks to Velta. They are doing well. And it's my second webinar, second presentation in Velta. Thanks to Saravanan sir and his team. And today's presentation for me is introduction to children's literature. This paper has taken place in all over the syllabus of the PG students. So that I have selected this topic and asked Mr. Dr. Saravanan sir, and he agreed to present today. Thank you once again to Velta, and let me start my presentation, Introduction to Children's Literature. First, let us see what is children's literature. Children's literature is nothing but the body of written works and accompanying illustrations produced in order to entertain or instruct young people. So the genre encompasses a wide range of works, including acknowledged classics of world literature, picture books, and easy to read stories written exclusively for children, and fairy tales, lullabies, fables, folk songs, and other primarily orally transmitted materials. Children's literature first clearly emerged as a distinct and independent form of literature in the second half of the 18th century, before which it had been at the best only in an embryonic stage. And during the 20th century, however, it's
excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, excuse me. Could you ask someone's mic is on? It's disturbing. It's echoing. Please, could you mute it? Thank you.
Yeah, you just ask the organizers, please. Yeah, it's muted. Okay. And its growth has been so luxuriant as to be regarded with a high respect definition of some of the terms. Let us see some of the definitions to this children. So all potential or actual young literates, from the instant they can with joy live through a picture book and or listen to a story.
Ramalakshmi ma'am has to mute it. Excuse me, ma'am. Ramalakshmi ma'am has to mute it.
Yes. So this is it. So the age of perhaps 14 or 15 may be called children. So the children includes young people. To consideration blur the definition, and today's young teenager is an anomaly. His environment pushes him toward precious maturity. Thus, though he may read children's books, and he also and increasingly reads adult books. Secondly, the child survives in many adults as a result, and some children's books, example Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderful Land, A.A. Miles winning the Poof, and at one time Munro leaves a story of Ferdinand. So these are also read widely by adults. And let us see the literature. In the term children's literature, the more important word is literature. And for the most part, the adjective imaginative is to be felt as preceding it, and it comprises that vast expanding territory recognizably staked out for a junior audience, and which does not mean that it is not also intended for seniors. And adults admittedly make up part of its population. Children's books are written, selected for publication, sold, and it bought, reviewed, and often read aloud by grown-ups. And sometimes they seems also to be written with adults in mind, as for example the popular French Asterix of comics, and comics parodying history, and it nevertheless by and large that is a sovereign republic of children's literature. And to it may be added 5 colonies or dependencies. First one is appropriated adult books satisfying 2 conditions. They must generally be read by children, and they must have sharply affected the course of children's literature. Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travel, the recollection of folk tales by brothers Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, the folk verse anthology. These are the Boy's Magic Horn. These were edited by Akim von Arnim and Clemens Brentano. And William Blake's Songs of Innocence, and second books, the audiences of which seem not to have been clearly conceived by their creators, for their creators may have ignored as irrelevant. And such a consideration, that are now fixed stars in the child's literary firmament. For example, Mark Twain's consideration. Okay, but there are now fixed stars in the children's literary firmament. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Charles Perrault's fairy tales. Thirdly, the picture books and easy to read stories, commonly subsumed under the label of literature, but qualifying as such only by relaxed standards. Though Beatrix Potter and several other writers do nonetheless qualify, and fourthly, the first quality children's versions of adult classics. So this is it. And And Walter D. Lamery's stories from the Bible, perhaps Howard's Pyle's retellings of the Robin Hood ballads and tales, and finally the domain of one's oral folk literature, folk material that the children have kept alive. Folk tales and fairy tales, fables and sayings, riddles, charms, and tongue twisters, folk songs, lullabies, hymns, carols, and other simple poetries, rhythm of the street, rhymes of the street, the playground, the nursery, and supremely mother goose and nonsense verse. So, the case for a children's literature, many otherwise comprehensive histories of literature slight or omit the child's reading interests. Many observers have made explicit the suspicion that the children's literature, like that of detection or suspense, is inferior. They cannot detect a sufficiently long tradition and distinguish an adequate number of master words, or find to use on thoughtful critics' words, such as style, sensibility, vision. Others, holding a contrary view, assert that tradition of 2 centuries is not to be ignored. Though the case for a children's literature must primarily rest on its major writers, and it is based as well on other supports that bolster its claim to aristocratic stature. And this children's literature, it while tributary of the literary mainstream, offers its own identifiable and semi-detached history. In part, it is the issue of certain traceable social movements, of which the discovery of the children is the most salient. And it is the independent to the degree that while it must meet many of the standards of adult literature, it has been also developed aesthetic criteria for its own, by it may be judged, and according to some of its finest practitioners, it is independent too, as the only existing literary medium enabling certain things to be said that would otherwise remain unsaid or unsavable. So the nature of its audience sets it apart. It is often read, especially by children younger than 12, in a manner suggesting trance distinct from that of adult reading. Universally diffused among these literate people, it offers a rich array of genres, types, and themes, some resembling grown-up progenitors, and many peculiar to itself. And its style, sensibility, vision, range over a spectrum wide enough to span matter of fact realism and tenuous mysticism. So other measures of its maturity include an extensive body, notably in German, Italy, Sweden, Japan, and also the United States of America, have some of the commentary, scholarship, criticism, history, biography, and bibliography, along with the beginnings of an aesthetic theory or philosophy of composition. So finally, one might note its power to engender its own institutions and publishing houses, theaters, libraries, and itinerant storytellers, critics, periodicals, instruction in centers of higher learning, and lecturerships, associations, and conferences, and books, book weeks, collections, exhibitions, and prizes. So this is it. And indeed, the current institutionalizing of children's literature on international scale has gone so far, and some feel as to cast a shadow on the spontaneity and lack of self-consciousness that should that should lie at its heart. And some general features and forces of this children's literature, let us see. And the discovery of the child. What is the discovery of the child? A self-aware literature flows from a recognition of its proper subject matter. So the proper subject matter of children's literature, apart from informational or didactic works, is children, and more broadly, it embraces the whole content of the child's imaginative world and that of the daily environment, as well as certain ideas and sentiments characteristic of it. And the population of this world is made up not only of children themselves, but of animated objects, plants, even grammatical and mathematical abstractions, toys, dolls, and puppets, real chimerical and invented animals, miniature and magnified humans, and spirits or grotesques of wood, water, air, fire, and space, supernatural and fantasy creatures, and figures of fairy tale, myth, and legend, imagined familiars, and doppelganger, and grown-ups of as seen through the child's eyes, whether Napoleon, Dr. Dolittle, parents or the corner grocer, that writers did not detect this lively cosmos for 2.5 millennia, one of the curiosities of the literature. At any moment, there has always been a numerous physically visible and audible company of children, whether this is sizable minority appraised as literary raw material, could be as rewarding as the adult majority was never asked. And so almost to the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, children's literature remained necessary. The chief, though not the only reason, is improbably simple. The child himself, though there was not seen or not seen, that is as a child. And in pre-literate societies, he was and is viewed in the light of his social, economical, and religious relationship to the tribe or clan. And though he may be nurtured in all tenderness, he is thought of not as himself but as a pre-adult, which is but one of his many forms. Among the Old Testament Jews, the child's place in society replicated his father's and molded by his relation to God. So, too, in ancient Greece and Rome, the child dressed in the modified adult costume, that which appropriate changes of fashion remained his fate for centuries to come, and it was conceived as a miniature adult. His importance lay not in himself, but in what Aristotle would have called his final cause, the potential citizen warrior. A girl child was a seedbed of future citizen warriors. Hence, the classical literature either does not see the child at all, or misconstrues him. And Asthenos, and Ascanius, as well as Medea's two children, are not persons. They are stage props, and Aristophanes scorns as unworthy of dramatic treatment the children in Euripides' Alcestis. This is it. And throughout the Middle Ages and far into the late Renaissance, the child remained as it were. Terra incognita, as it were, the terra incognita during the Renaissance period. The child is remained as terra incognita. And a sharp sense of generation gap, one of the motives of a children's literature, scarcely existed. So the family, young and old, was a kind of homogenized mix. Sometimes children were even regarded as infrahuman. For Montague, they had neither mental activities nor recognizable body shape. The year 1658 is a turning point in that year. Moravian educator named Comenius published Orbis Sensualium Pictus. Orbis Sensualium Pictus. It is a visible world in pictures, published in 1659. And it's a teaching device that was also the first picture book for children. It embodied a novel insight, and children's reading should be of a special order, because the children are not scaled down the adults, but the conscious, systematic and successful exploitation of the insight was to wait for almost a century. And it is generally felt that both as a person worthy for special regard and as an idea worthy of serious contemplation, the child began to come into his own in the second half of the 18th century. And his emergence, as well as that of a literature suited to his needs, and it is linked to many historical forces, among them the development of Enlightenment thought, for example, Rousseau, and before him John Locke. So the rise of the middle class, the beginnings of the emancipation of women the children's literature unit that for grown-ups is in large measure of distaff product and romanticism with its minor strands of the cult of the child, for example, Wordsworth and others, and of genres making a special appeal to the young, the young one, like for example, folk tales and fairy tales, myths and ballads, etc. So yet, with all these forces working for the child, he still might not have emerged that it had it not been for a few unpredictable geniusness. And this William Blake, Edward Lear, Lewis Carroll, Lucia May, Alcott, Mark Twain, Christina Anderson, but once tentatively unsavaged as an independent being, a literature proper to him could also be envisaged, and so in the mid 18th century may be defined as children's literature was at last developing in the middle of the 18th century. And the third universal feature, children's literature appears later than adult and grows more slowly. And only after the trail has been well blazed does it make use of new techniques, whether the composition or the illustration. As for content only, after the World War II, it didn't exploit certain realistic themes and attitudes, turning on race, class, and sex that had been part of general literature at least since the 1850s. So this tardiness may be due to the child's natural conservatism. And fourth one, the tempo of development varies sharply from country to country and from region to region. It is plausible that England should create a complex children's literature, while less developed region, the Balkans, for example, the Balkans. And less clear is why the equally high cultures of France and England should be represented by unequal literatures. This is it. And let us see the didactic versus of the imaginative process. So the fifth one is the most striking general feature is the creative tension resulting from a constantly shifting balance between two forces, that of the pulpit schoolroom and that of the imagination. The first force may take on many guises. It may stress received religious or moral doctrine, thus generating the Catholic children's literature of Spain or the more tale of Georgian and early Victorian England. And it may bear down less on morality than on mere good manners, proprietary or adjustment to the prevailing social code. And it may emphasizing nationalist or patriotic motives, as in Edmondo de Amicis, Post-Risorgimento Cura, the heart of a child, or much Soviet production. Or its concern may be pedagogical, the imparting of useful information frequently sugar coated in narrative or dialogue. Whatever its form, it is distinguishable from the shaping sprint of imagination, which ordinarily embodies itself in children's games and rhymes, the fairy tales, the fantasy, the animal stories such as Kipling's Jungle Books, nonsense, non-normal poetry, humor, on the realistic novel conceived as art rather than admonition, and children's literature designed for entertainment rather than self-improvement, and it's aiming at emotional expansion rather than acculturation. Usually, it develops late. Alice in Wonderland, the first supreme victory of the imagination, except Mother's Goose, and it did not appear until 1865. Frequently, the literature of delight has underground sources of nourishment and inspiration, oral tradition of nursery songs, and the folkish institutions of the chapbook and the penny romance. While the didactic, imaginative, or conveniently thought of as polar, they need as not always inimical. Little Women and Robinson Crusoe are at once didactically moral and highly poetical. Nevertheless, many of the acknowledged classics in the field, from Alice to the Hobbit, incline to fantasy, which is less true of literature for the grown-ups. Let us see the development of the children's literature, how the development has taken place. Let us see the criteria. Keeping these 5 general features we have seen so far, development in mind, second criteria may now be suggested as helpful in making a gross estimate of the degree of that development within any given country. Some of these criteria are artistic, others linked with social progress, wealth, technological level, or the political structure. In what seems their order of importance, these criteria are the degree of awareness of the child's identity we have seen so far. And the second one is the progress made beyond the passive dependence on oral tradition, folklore, and legend. And the third one is rise of a class of professional writers as distinct from moral reformers, school teachers, clerics, or versatile journalists. All those who, for pedagogical, doctrinal, or pecuniary reasons, turn themselves into writers for children. For example, a conscious Italian literature for young people may be said to have begun in 1776 with the Reverend Francisco Sovi's moralistic short stories, and largely because that literature continued to be composed largely by non-professionals. Its record has been lackluster. It took more than a century after the Reverend Francisco to produce a Pinocchio. And only in the 20th century, as typified by the outstanding work of a professional like Gianni Rodari, his work example, Telephone Tales. It did children's literature in Italy, seems to be the getting into full stride. And fourth one is the degree of independence from authoritarian controls, such like church, state, school systems, a rigid family structure. Although this criterion might be rejected by histories of some some nations, and one must somehow try to explain why the Spanish or a great and imaginative people took so long, indeed until 1952, to produce in Sangeetha Silva, a children's writer of any notable talent. This is it. And next we pass on to the fifth point: number of classics, the influence of which transcendence national boundaries has taken place. And the sixth point is invention of new forms or genres and the exploitation of a variety of traditional ones. So this is it. And the seventh point is measure of dependence on translations. So the translations has taken place. And the eighth one is quantity of primary literature, that is annual production of children's books, and more to be the point good, more to the point of the point of good children's books. And the ninth point is quantity of secondary literature, richness and scope of body of scholarship, criticism and reviewing. This is it. And the 10th point is level of institutionary development, like libraries, publishing houses, associations, etc., etc. And to these criteria, some might add a vigorous tradition of illustration, but that is arguable. But while Beatrix Potter's words and pictures compose an indivisible unit, it is equally true that a country may produce a magnificent school of artists. And the criteria applied, three examples. Let us see that. West versus East. The first application of such reveals the expected a gap separating the achievement of the far east from that of the west. Some eastern literatures like New Guinea have not advanced beyond the stage of the oral tradition. Others like India, Philippines, Ceylon, Iran have been handicapped by language problems, and professional children's writers, or rather than in the West, according to D.R. Kalaya, former director of the Delhi Public Library, no such class exists in Hindi. In Japan, authoritarian patterns, filial piety, and ancestor worship have operated as brakes, though for less since World War II. A low economic level and inadequate technology discouraged in such countries as Burma, Sri Lanka, Ceylon, Thailand, such countries, the organization and the distribution of indigenous writing. A towering roadblock is the tendency to imitate the children's books of the West. So this is it. So by this way, the West versus the East. And it is true that this vast eastern region, considered as a whole, has produced a number of works ranking as classics. Most advanced is Japan, and its literature for children goes back at least to the late 19th century, and by 1928 it was established in its own right. So Japan's discovery of the children seems to have been made directly after the World War II. In Iwaya Susanimi, Japan has its Grimm. In Ogawa Minai, perhaps it's Anderson. In the contemporary Ishii Mamanko, a critic and creative writer of quality. In Takayama Mikio's Harp of Burma, it is available in English also, and a high quality post-war controversial novel. But though less markedly in Japan, the basic Oriental inspiration remains fixed in folklore. Also in China and Japan, in nursery songs and rhymes also. And the didactic imperative continues to act as a hobble, but most criteria, the development of Eastern, as it has compared with the Western, children's literature still appears to be sparse and tentative. Let us see the North versus the South. In Western Europe, there is a sharp variation or unevenness as between North and South in the tempo of development. So this basic feature was first pointed out by Paul H.O.D, a French critic, in less rivers, less infants, yet less calms. In English, it is translated by Margaret Mitchell books Children and Men in 1944, and its fourth edition taken place in 1960. So in the matter of literature for children, the North surpasses the South by large margin. For Hazard, Spain had no children's literature. Italy, with its Pinocchio and Cure, could point only to an isolated pair of works of note, and even France, in order to strengthen its claims, had to include northern Frenchmen, Ekman, Chateaubriand, Jules Verne, and the classic Comtes de Ségur came from Russia. So Hazard wrote in 1920s. Since then, the situation has improved not only in his own country, but in Italy and in Portugal. Yet he is essentially correct. The South cannot match the richness of England, Scotland, Germany, and the Scandinavian countries. To reinforce this position, one might also adduce the United States, noting that the Mason-Dixon line is through not in the field of general literature, a dividing line the American South, even including the Uncle Remus's stories. Uncle Remus's stories has supplied very little good children's reading. As for nursery literature, though analogs, rhymes are found everywhere, especially in China. The English Mother Goose is unique in the claims made for its as a work of art. Why the North superior to the South? The first criterion of development may be illuminating. It simply restates H.O.D's dictum for the Latins. Children have never been anything but future men. The Nordics have understood better this truer truth that men are only grown-up children. Adults are absolute children, says the American children's author Dr. Seuss. And Hazard does not mention other factors. And historically, the South has shown greater attachment to authoritarian controls. Also, up to recent times, it has depended heavily on reworked folklore as against the free inventions. Besides, there is the mysterious factor of climate. It could be true that children in Latin countries mature faster and are sooner ready for adult literature. And in France, a special intellectual tradition that of Cartesian logic tends to discourage a children's literature. It discourages the children's literature. So clear and distinct ideas, excellent in themselves, do not seem to feed the youthful imagination. In Latin America, again applying the chosen criteria, familiar patterns are recognizable, and unevenness as compared with the United States, belatedness. In Argentina, the Quinto infantile is hardly detectable before 1900. And especially an unbalanced polarity with the didactician, decidedly the stronger magnet. The close connection of the church with the child's family and school life has encouraged literature stressing pity, and this at a time when the West, at least in its northern latitudes, is concerned less with the salvation than with the imagination of the child. Fantasy emerged only in 1930s, and in Brazil and in Brazil and America, the Latin American literature is generally displays special characteristics, and it parts of librarian heritage, partially for linguistic decorations, which is unpalatable to the relatively straightforward taste of the young reader. Also, the Latin American view of the child remains tinged with a sentimentally which may European countries and the United States had by 1914 more or less freed themselves. Thus, West for children, a medium specially cultivated in Latin America, has run to the soft and the sweet, even the lachrymose, rather than to gay, the humorous of the sanguine moods more congenial to the child's sensibility. This is true when even the children's verse of the Nobel Prize winning poet Gabriela Mistral. To these two weaknesses, one must add a third, and the practical difficulty taken place involved in the fact that most families cannot afford books, and the absence of powerful middle class has had a retarding effect. So children in Latin America often complaining that the authors write not for them but for their parents. They are given lecturer, reading matter, rather than literature, which is to say that Latin America, the admonitory note considered so useful by the church and parent continues to be sounded. So this is it. So the children in Latin America, they the others write not not for them, but only for the parents and for the church. And in summary, and applying the criteria, some less advanced Latin American countries can hardly be said to have a children's literature at all. Others have produced notable writers. Brazil's Jose Bento, Motirio Lapato, Argentina's Ana Maria Berry, Colombia's Rafael Pombo. So these, yet the quality gap separating the Latin American children's literature from that of its northern neighbor is still wide. Now let us see the historical. I think the time is getting on because so many participants sent a very nice presentation, excellent and all, because they really they are appreciating me, or they want to conclude because time is very later. Okay, let me complete it in 10 minutes. Okay, so let us see the historical sketches of the major literature in some one or 2 points. Okay, and let us see the overview of England. The England have often confessed a certain reluctance to say goodbye to childhood. So this curious national trait, baffling to their continental neighbors, may lie at the root of their supremacy in children's literature. Yet it remains a mystery. But if it cannot be accounted for, it cannot be summed up. And from the critics' vantage point, the English as well as the Scots and the Welsh must be credited with having originated or triumphed in more children's genres than any other country. They have excelled in the school story, 2 solid centuries of it, from Sarah Fielding, The Governess, or the Little Female Academy in 1745 to say C. Dale Lewis Waterbury incident. It is in 1948, and including such milestones as Thomas Brown's School Days in 1857 and Kipling's Stacky and Co. in 1899. And a boy's adventure story with one undetachable world masterpieces in Stevens's Treasure Island in 1883. Plus a solid line of talented practitioners from the Victorian Robert Ballantyne, the Coral Island, to the contemporary Richard practitioners from the Richard Church and Leon Garfield, Devil in the Fog, and The Girl's Book. Often trash, but possessing in Charlotte M. Yon at least one writer of exceptional vitality, historical fiction from Marriott's vigorous, but what this is it. So this is it taken place in the region England, and let us see the social historian surviving the same field from a different angle would point out that the English were the first people in history to develop not only a self-conscious, independent children's literature, but also the commercial institutions capable of supporting or furthering it. He would note the striking creative swing between didacticism and delight. He would detect the sources in ballads, chapbooks, nurses, rhythms, and street literature that have at critical moments prompted that imagination. What would perhaps interest him most is the way in which children's literature reflects over more than 2 centuries the child's constantly shifting position in society. And let us see the early Middle Ages to 1712. Children's books did not stand out by themselves as a clear but subordinate branch of English literature until the middle of the 18th century. At least one critic has used prehistorical to designate all children's books published in England up to 1744, when John Numbery offered a little pretty pocket book. So, before that, and as far as back as the Middle Ages, children came in contact with the schoolroom letters and etc. etc. There was the Anglo-Saxon theological and historian Venerable Reed with his textbook on natural sciences. So this is the things taken place in the Middle Ages of 18th century, and the entire pre-1744 period is redeemed by 2 works of genius. Neither Robinson Crusoe nor Gulliver's Travel was meant for children. Immediately abridged and bowdlerized, they were seized upon by the prosperous young, and Defoe engendered a whole school of Robinsonites in most European countries, the most famous example being Weiss's Swiss Family Robinson. It was taken place in 1822 to 1830. So on the whole, during the millennium separating Alcuin from Newbery, the child's mind was thought of it all and something to be improved, but his imagination as something to be shielded, and his soul has something to be saved. And from T.W. Anderson to Alice, the Napoleon called the English a nation of shopkeepers, and in England art may owe much to trade, and children's literature in England got its start from merchants such as Thomas Boorman, of whom title is known, and especially John Newbery, of whom a great deal more is known. And the research has established that as at least as early as 1730, Boorman began publishing for children, especially for children. So this is it. So this is taken place from 1712 to 1865, and I will jump up to conclude my points. in the 20th century, what happens to the children's literature? Let us see in the 20th century. Finally, it is characterized by dominance in children's fiction of middle and the upper middle class mores, the appearance in the late 1930s, and let us see the 20th century. In the 20th century, from the turn of the century to the close of World War II, a number of superior works were produced. The books of D. Brunchhoff and Forscher have already been cited, and a remarkable picture of prehistoric life by J.H. Rosny, pseudonym of J.H.H. Box, appeared in 1911 and has proved so durable that in 1967 an English translation, The Quest for Fire, appeared, and Patakov's Egg Filters by Andrew Morris, a gentle satire on war, has lasted. It is translated in English by the name of Patty Puffs and Tinifiers in 1948, and it is reissued in 1968. So his fantasy pays these 36,000 of volunteers is almost as popular. So the famous dramatist Charles Widerick has done much to advance the cause of French children's literature. So this is it. So by this way, the 20th century, the production after 1945 so multiplied that to single out names is bound to involve some injustice. Some few, however, by reason either of the originality of their talent or the scope of their achievement, stand out. One is Maurice Druon, whose Tischou of the Green Fingers in 1957. It is translated into English in 1958. It's a kind of children's candidate, and demonstrated how the moral tale given sufficient sensibility and humor can be transmuted into art. Perhaps the most original temperament was that of the Henry Barstow, author of four eerie, haunting provincial novels about the boy Pascalet and his strange involvements with a gypsy companion, a fox, and a dog in a shifting, legend-shrouded natural world. And it may be that time will rate these books like those of the English writer Walter D. La Murray among the finest of their kind. And Bastow's Infant Eclat revived in 1955. It was translated in English in 1955, The Boy. So by this way, the production of the production multiplied in 1945. So the 20th century came to the development. So by this way, the children's literature came to the development in each and every region. That's it. Thank you. Sir? Sir, I will send the sir, Saravanan sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, conclude my session, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Yeah. Malati, ma'am.
Yes. A very good evening.
Good
And
evening.
it is beyond imagination for people who have gone to the higher levels of literature, that there is so much of literature on